Hey there, it's BitB. I've been doing a whole lot of thinking about this video's subject, and I decided to plop everything down in a scripted talkie piece. So, during the recent Nintendo Direct, a lot of noteworthy things were announced, like the Smash announcement for Pyra and Mythra, the reveal of Splatoon 3, etc, etc. But one thing that I've seen some mixed reception on was the announcement that The Legend of Zelda: Skyward Sword was getting ported to the Switch. I've been watching the response from people, and it tends to be a split reaction between 1, people getting absolutely hyped about the re-release, and 2, people who are criticizing the choice to make the port in the first place. So I want to take a moment to really tally up everything and really see a full picture of the pros and cons of a re-release. Let's start with some pros about it. Number 1, performance improvements. Now, right away, I noticed that the frame rate was drastically improved from the original. That tells me that, at the very least, Nintendo acknowledges that the limitations of the Wii hardware needed a little buffing up. And with this new port, they seem to be taking advantage of a crisper frame rate. Gameplay-wise, I could see an FPS buff really helping the game experience. Number 2, potential improvements to the motion controls. It's not confirmed as of yet if the Joy-Cons do a better job with the motion controls or not. But considering Nintendo's had a good 10 years to clean up technology and make it smaller, more efficient, and possibly more accurate, we might see the gameplay drastically improve from the original Wii release. No longer will we need to worry about strapping that nunchuck cable into our Wii Motion Plus certified controller, which hopefully you have, otherwise you gotta deal with the dreaded adapter. Number 3, the new buttons-only playstyle. Finally, after so long of touting the motion controls in this game like some kind of breakthrough miracle of the Zelda franchise, Nintendo is going to give us the option to play the game using only controller inputs. Instead of physical sword swipes, you can now have the sword swipes mapped to the right control stick. It's clear that Nintendo is aware of the long-time criticism of their choice to lock the game down to motion controls and wanted to improve the experience for future players that might not be keen on the idea of wiggling their hands around. Number 4, a second chance to experience the game. This loosely ties into the previous point. There surely were folks who just couldn't get into the idea of a strictly motion-controlled Zelda. So now, those fans have the opportunity to go back and retry the experience with a more familiar playstyle. There's quite a few elements of Skyward Sword that you don't get to experience in any other Zelda titles. There are plenty of sights, sounds, and characters that are incredibly noteworthy that you can finally give a second chance. Now, let's address some of the cons brought up. Number 1, the game's looks. As nice as it is to have a 60 frame per second Skyward Sword, the textures don't look at all upscaled from the previous version. Keep in mind, these textures were intended for a standard definition television screen, so a lot of the rough around the edges parts of the game come through a lot more noticeably. Everything looks a bit blurry and flat when you blow all the visuals up like this. A re-release like this would have been a great opportunity to improve the textures and make this game really shine. Number 2, another port. A common criticism of Nintendo is their habit of taking their old IPs, guarding them like a greedy gold-hoarding dragon, and releasing them to every future console. They've done that a lot with the Switch in particular. We just had the re-release of Super Mario 3D World not too long ago. And while the new expansion is a welcome inclusion, there's no denying that it feels like a double dip on the part of Nintendo. Skyward Sword is another case of old Tendy reaching into their vaults and seeing if they can make lightning strike twice. Number 3, the price. When Skyward Sword originally released for the Wii, it was priced at $49.99. The new Switch port is being sold at $59.99, a whole $10 markup from its original price. Considering this is a 10-year-old game, many people don't see the reason for why this game needed to be set at a full release price at launch. It would have made more sense for the game to be listed at something like $39.99. Or heck, just to keep people really cool, maybe even price it at $29.99. $60 just seems like a steep price for what the game is, and the upgrades just don't excuse the price. Now, let's get into my own personal opinion on the matter. Let me start all this fun stuff by telling you right away that I'm kind of a Skyward Sword apologist, so that should give you a good idea of where I stand with the game. So if you're expecting me to completely tear this game to shreds, I'm gonna let you down gently here and tell you that isn't gonna happen. If you ask me, I'd say there's a lot of charm to Skyward Sword that ended up being muddied up by the control scheme. I fully admit, I think the motion control angle was a completely stupid idea, and Nintendo shouldn't have gone all in on it. But I think this new port is an amazing opportunity for people to get to experience this game in a much more comfortable way. We don't know 100% for sure if the control stick inputs are a perfect replacement of the motion controls, and we won't really know until some reviewers get their hands on some copies of the game. But just from a fundamental level, I think the control stick would do the job perfectly, and this game will be much more enjoyable to play. Also, as someone who gets really put off by motion controls in games, especially when Nintendo shoves them into your face like a rotten life tree fruit, I can say that the motion controls in Skyward Sword were okay. I would have had a much better experience without them, I feel, but they weren't as god-awful as people make them out to be. They work well enough that you can get through the game with minimal problems. I think Skyward Sword just has the reputation it has because it's fun to make fun of the black sheep of the franchise. If something failed, even a little bit, then obviously it must have failed miserably, and we build these memories up that something was somehow 10 times worse than what it actually was. I think if people gave it another chance, they'd see the charm and entertainment that lies underneath its reputation. And for newcomers that never got to experience it, you get a chance to experience the game at its best. Now, there's one last thing I wanted to cover here, and it's a little soapboxy. One con of the Skyward Sword Switch port that I'm not lending any validity to is the point of,
it's just a waste of time. They should just ignore it and work on Breath of the Wild 2.
The reason I don't count this as a valid argument is simple. Skyward Sword is not Breath of the Wild 2. It has nothing to do with it, and likely had no impact on the production of it. This is like if there was a Spider-Man TV series being rerun on TV, and someone said,
"Oh God, that show sucks! Why can't Marvel get back to work on the new Spider-Man movie?"
It's two entirely different mediums. Two completely separate teams made them. And at the most, maybe those reruns would need to be upscaled to HD. But that's about it. And they likely had a B team set aside working on that, while the main team was busy making the new movie. That's where we're at with Skyward Sword and Breath of the Wild 2. I think a big part of why people compare them is because of the way they presented them at the recent Nintendo Direct. Eiji Aonuma came out on camera and announced that they had no new news to share about Breath of the Wild 2, and then immediately showcased Skyward Sword afterwards. I think people looked at that as Nintendo taking away something they wanted and replacing it with something they didn't. And really, that couldn't be farther from the truth. Breath of the Wild 2 is still in production, and they'll showcase something when they have something to showcase. If a completely separate thing gets announced within the same franchise, it's not immediately classified as garbage just because it's not the thing that you personally wanted to see. Think about this. Considering what we've seen and know about the Skyward Sword port, do you think it took mass amounts of manpower to port it? Or was it more likely a tiny team at Nintendo getting handed a softball project to help them get experience at game design? This is small cookies. Breath of the Wild 2 shouldn't influence your opinion on something that is completely unrelated. Anywho, that's my 2 cents on that whole thing. You have anything to add to the discussion? Post it in the comments below. All I ask is for people to be civil. I know how the internet can be. Thanks for watching.